The clock ticked past 6 in the evening at the towering headquarters of Maxwell Industries. Most employees had already cleared their desks and headed home, but Lily Wong was still organizing files at her workstation. As the newest administrative assistant in the company, she felt the need to make a good impression even if it meant staying late. 3 months into her job, Lily remained something of a mystery to her coworkers. She arrived precisely on time each morning, did her work efficiently, ate lunch alone with a book in hand, and rarely joined office conversations. It wasn't that. She was unfriendly. She always smiled politely when greeted and helped anyone who asked, but there was a careful distance she maintained, like someone who'd learned that keeping to herself was the safest option. From his corner office, Robert Maxwell watched her through the glass partition. As the CEO and founder of Maxwell Industries, he had built his real estate empire from nothing, climbing his way to the top through sharp deals and an even sharper personality. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and custom-tailored suits, he projected the image of success he'd worked so hard to achieve. Robert took pride in knowing everything about his employees, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, how to use both to his advantage. But this quiet woman who joined his company had so far evaded his usual tactics of friendly interrogation disguised as small talk. "Still here, Miss Wong?" he called out as he left his office, briefcase in hand. Lily looked up, startled. "Yes, Mr. Maxwell. Just finishing up the Henderson property files." "Dedicated, I like that." He paused at her desk, noticing how she subtly straightened her posture. "You know, the annual company gala is this Saturday at my home. All employees are expected to attend." "Yes, sir. I received the invitation." "Good. It's not just a party, it's a networking opportunity. The kind that can make or break careers in this business." He said this with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lily nodded. "I'll be there, Mr. Maxwell." "Excellent. I look forward to seeing you. Mingle." With that, he strode toward the elevator, leaving Lily to release the breath she'd been holding. Saturday arrived, and Robert Maxwell's mansion was transformed into a showcase of wealth and taste. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over marble floors, while waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The guest list included not just company employees but also business partners, potential investors, and local celebrities, all carefully selected to reflect the image of success Robert had cultivated. Standing near the grand staircase, Robert greeted guests with practiced charm, making each person feel momentarily special before moving on to the next. He was in his element here, the unquestioned king of his domain. "Quite the spectacle, as always," commented Thomas Chen, Robert's longtime business partner and the only person who could speak to him with such frankness. "Nothing wrong with showing people what success looks like," Robert replied with a smirk. "Speaking of which, have you seen our newest hire, the quiet one from accounting? I've been trying to figure her out." Thomas shook his head. "You mean administrative, not accounting? And why not just let the woman do her job? Not everyone needs to be an open book." Robert laughed. "In my company, they do. I don't trust people who keep secrets," says the man with the most secrets in the room. Thomas muttered, but Robert had already spotted Lily entering through the main doors. She wore a simple black dress, modest compared to the designer outfits around her. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore minimal jewelry, just small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. To most of the glittering crowd, she was practically invisible, and that seemed to be her preference. Lily accepted a glass of water from a passing server and positioned herself near a large potted plant, clearly hoping to fulfill her obligation of attendance while attracting as little attention as possible. For an hour she succeeded. She made appropriate small talk when approached, smiled at the right moments, and gradually edged her way around the perimeter of the room. The massive house fascinated her, not for its obvious displays of wealth, but for the occasional glimpses of genuine beauty, like the small collection of Japanese woodblock prints in a hallway, or the antique books visible through an open library door. It was during one of these explorations that she discovered the music room. Stepping inside the empty space, Lily felt herself relax for the first time that evening. The room was designed for acoustics, with high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. But what drew her attention was the magnificent grand piano in the center, a Steinway in polished ebony, its lid raised like a great black wing. Without thinking, she approached it, her fingers hovering inches above the keys without touching them. Something crossed her face then, longing perhaps or memory, before she quickly pulled her hand back. "Do you play?" The voice startled her. Lily turned to find Robert Maxwell watching her from the doorway, a glass of scotch in his hand and curiosity in his eyes. "No," she said too quickly. "I was just admiring it. It's beautiful." Robert entered the room, studying her with new interest. "It's a Steinway Model D concert grand. Cost me more than some people's homes." He ran his hand along the piano's glossy surface. "Shame that it mostly sits here for show. My daughter took lessons for years but never had the discipline to master it." Lily nodded politely, already looking for an exit. "Your home is lovely, Mr. Maxwell. Thank you for hosting us." "Wait." Robert blocked her path, his expression changing as an idea formed. "You know, I think you're not being truthful with me, Miss Wong." "Excuse me? About the piano, the way you looked at it. That wasn't simple admiration, that was recognition." His voice had taken on a performative quality, loud enough to attract the attention of guests passing by the open door. "Really, Mr. Maxwell, I should rejoin the party," Lily said quietly. But Robert was already calling out to the gathering crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've made a wonderful discovery. My mysterious new assistant has been hiding a talent from us all." More guests began filtering into the music room, curious about the commotion. Thomas appeared, giving Robert a questioning look, which the CEO ignored. "Mr. Maxwell, please," Lily whispered, her face flushing. "There's been a misunderstanding." "Don't be modest now," Robert continued, gesturing grandly. "I insist you play something for us. We're all friends here." The room had filled with at least 30 people now, all eyes on Lily. Some looked uncomfortable at the obvious coercion, while others seemed eager for entertainment at someone else's expense. "I really don't," Lily began. "I insist," Robert repeated, his smile fixed, but his eyes cold. "After all, I'm not just your host tonight, but your employer every other day of the week." The threat was thinly veiled. A painful silence fell over the room. Thomas stepped forward as if to intervene, but stopped when Lily slowly moved toward the piano bench. "Just one piece," she said so softly that only those closest could hear. Robert beamed triumphantly, raising his glass. "Everyone, quiet, please. Miss Wong is going to favor us with a performance." Lily sat at the bench, her back straight but her shoulders tense. She stared at the keys for a long moment, not moving, as whispers circulated among the guests. "Having trouble remembering how it goes?" Robert asked, his tone dripping with mock concern. A few nervous laughs followed. Lily closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. A decision had been made. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath and prepared to play. In that suspended moment before music filled the room, only Thomas noticed the slight tremble in her fingers and the determination that steadied them. Robert Maxwell stood with his drink in hand, waiting for the entertainment he'd orchestrated, completely unaware that his attempt to humiliate his quiet employee was about to backfire spectacularly. Robert Maxwell watched with barely concealed satisfaction as his quiet administrative assistant sat frozen at the piano. The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, their champagne glasses suspended mid-air as the silence stretched on. This was exactly the kind of impromptu entertainment he enjoyed at these events. Someone out of their depth, scrambling to save face. "Perhaps I was mistaken," Robert announced to the room, his voice carrying a false note of concern. "It seems Miss Wong might have exaggerated her abilities." He took a step toward the piano, ready to dismiss her with what would appear to be kindness to the onlookers but would leave her thoroughly humiliated. Thomas Chen, watching from the edge of the crowd, recognized the familiar pattern. He'd seen Robert pull similar stunts before, creating situations where employees were forced to reveal weaknesses, all while Robert positioned himself as the gracious authority figure. It was a power play, pure and simple. "Robert," Thomas said quietly, approaching his business partner, "this isn't necessary." But Robert ignored him, focused entirely on Lily, who still hadn't moved from the bench. Her eyes remained fixed on the keys, her breathing shallow. To the observers, she appeared paralyzed by stage fright. "No need to be embarrassed," Robert called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not everyone has musical talent, though I do prefer honesty in my employees." The implication hung in the air she had somehow deceived him, rather than him putting words in her mouth. A few guests began whispering to each other. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Others watched with the morbid fascination of witnesses to a car crash. A younger executive from the marketing department actually snickered, eager to curry favor with the boss. Lily heard none of it. The polished ivory and ebony keys before her had transported her to another time and place. 8 years had passed since she'd last sat before a piano of this caliber. 8 years since music had been the center of her world, before life had taken a sharp, painful turn. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Not from fear, though that's what the onlookers assumed, but from the overwhelming rush of muscle memory and emotion. It was like encountering a beloved old friend unexpectedly, the joy of recognition mixed with the pain of all the years lost between. "I think that's enough," Thomas said, moving forward to offer Lily an escape. "We've put Miss Wong in an unfair position." "Nonsense," Robert replied, waving him off. "I'm simply giving her an opportunity to showcase her talents. That's what these gatherings are for, after all." His smile didn't reach his eyes, though I'm beginning to wonder if there's anything to showcase. Several more seconds passed. Robert's amusement began to fade, replaced by mild irritation. This wasn't playing out as he'd expected. Rather than a fumbling attempt followed by embarrassed retreat, the woman was just sitting there. It was almost as if she was deliberately drawing out the moment to make him look bad. "Well," he said sharply, "either play something or don't, Miss Wong. We have other entertainment planned for the evening." At that exact moment, Lily's hands came to rest on the keys. The first notes were so soft that people leaned forward to hear better. A gentle, almost hesitant melody began to take shape. The opening bars of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. The piece began simply enough, but everyone in the music room could immediately tell that these were not the halting notes of an amateur. The melody flowed from her fingers with a delicate precision that spoke of years of training. Each phrase connected to the next with natural grace, like a gentle stream finding its way through a moonlit garden. There was a sweetness to the sound, but also a depth of feeling that caught the listeners off guard. Robert's smug expression faltered. This was not what he had expected, not even close. He glanced around at his guests, noting their surprise, then back at the woman at his piano. Her posture had changed. The nervous administrative assistant had vanished, replaced by someone who suddenly commanded the room with quiet authority. As the piece progressed, Lily's confidence seemed to grow. Her body swayed slightly with the music, her face softened, and her hands moved across the keyboard with increasing fluidity. The nocturne's middle section brought faster notes and more complex harmonies, which she navigated with effortless skill. Thomas watched his business partner's face with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Robert looked stunned, his glass of scotch forgotten in his hand. The game had backfired spectacularly. "Who is she?" Robert whispered, leaning toward Thomas without taking his eyes off Lily. Thomas shook his head. "Maybe if you'd actually read her file instead of looking for ways to toy with her, you'd know." The nocturne built to its emotional peak, Lily's fingers dancing across the keys with controlled passion. Several guests had closed their eyes, transported by the beauty of the music filling the acoustically perfect room. Others watched in undisguised amazement as the unassuming woman they'd barely noticed all evening revealed herself to be an artist of considerable talent. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then spontaneous applause erupted throughout the room. People who moments ago had been embarrassed bystanders to an attempted humiliation were now smiling and clapping enthusiastically. Lily seemed almost surprised by the reaction, as if she'd forgotten where she was and who was listening. She blinked, coming back to herself, and gave a small, awkward nod of acknowledgement. "That was beautiful," someone called. Out, play something else, urged another. Guest, please, added a third. The crowd had doubled in size as word spread through the mansion. People pressed into the doorway and peered over shoulders, trying to get a glimpse of the unexpected performer. Robert remained frozen, his plan having collapsed around him. He'd intended to establish dominance over this quiet new employee, to show everyone his power by exposing her inadequacy. Instead, he'd provided her with a platform to shine. Chopin is one of my favorites, said an elderly woman who had pushed her way to the front. She was the wife of one of Robert's most important investors. Young lady, where did you study? Lily hesitated, glancing at Robert as if seeking permission to speak. His face had settled into an unreadable mask. I studied at the Juilliard School, she finally answered, her voice barely audible above the continuing murmurs of appreciation. The revelation sent a new wave of whispers through the crowd. Juilliard was one of the most prestigious performing arts conservatories in the world. Juilliard? Robert repeated, finding his voice at last. You never mentioned that in your interview. Lily met his gaze directly for the first time that evening. You never asked about my background in music, Mr. Maxwell. You were only interested in my typing speed and software proficiency. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Thomas didn't bother hiding his smile. Well, Robert said, struggling to regain control of the situation. This is certainly an unexpected surprise. Who would have thought my administrative assistant was a concert pianist? Former concert pianist, Lily corrected gently. She stood from the bench, clearly intending to step away. Oh no, you can't stop now, called out the elderly investor's wife. We must hear more. Isn't that right, Robert? Put on the spot, Robert had no choice but to agree. Of course. Miss Wong, please continue. Consider it a request from management. He attempted a joke, but it fell flat, the power dynamic having shifted perceptibly. Lily hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Her fingers returned to the keys, but this time there was no uncertainty, no delay. She launched directly into the powerful opening chords of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, the sound filling the room with such force that several people stepped back in surprise. This was no gentle nocturne, but a piece full of drama and intensity. Lily's hands moved with incredible speed and precision, drawing sounds from the Steinway that it likely hadn't produced since it was purchased as a status symbol. The passionate music seemed to reveal something about her that her quiet demeanor had kept hidden. A depth of feeling, a history of struggle and resilience. Robert watched, his initial shock giving way to curiosity and then to something more complex. There was embarrassment there, certainly, at having his little power play so thoroughly upended. But there was also a growing admiration, despite himself, for the unexpected talent he had unwittingly exposed. As Lily played on, losing herself once more in the music, Robert noticed Thomas studying him with a knowing expression. You might want to close your mouth, Robert, his business partner said quietly, and perhaps consider that there's more to your employees than what serves your immediate needs. Robert took a large swallow of his scotch, unable to formulate a response. For the first time in many years in his own home, surrounded by people who typically deferred to his every whim, Robert Maxwell found himself completely upstaged by the very person he had tried to diminish. The final notes of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata resonated through the music room, hanging in the air for a breathtaking moment before the applause erupted. The crowd that had gathered was no longer simply Robert Maxwell's curated guest list. Household staff had appeared in doorways, security guards peered in from the hallway, and even the caterers had paused their duties to listen. Lily sat motionless at the piano for several seconds, her hands still poised above the keys, before the sound of enthusiastic clapping brought her back to the present. She blinked as if waking from a dream, and a flush colored her cheeks as she realized all eyes were on her. Magnificent, declared the elderly investor's wife, approaching the piano with her hands outstretched. My dear, that was extraordinary. I haven't heard the Pathetique played with such feeling since I attended the Berlin Philharmonic in my youth. Others crowded forward, their earlier discomfort at Robert's power play forgotten in their eagerness to speak to the unexpected talent in their midst. Do you still perform professionally? Asked a woman in a midnight blue gown. Are you teaching currently? Inquired another guest. Would you consider playing for my daughter's wedding next spring? Called out a man from the back of the room. Lily appeared overwhelmed by the sudden attention, rising from the piano bench with a polite smile that didn't quite mask her discomfort at being the center of attention. Thank you, but I haven't performed publicly in many years, she explained quietly. What a waste, exclaimed the elderly woman, turning to Robert with accusation in her eyes. Robert, you mean to tell me you have a Juilliard-trained concert pianist filing your paperwork? Robert, who had been watching the scene unfold with an increasingly sour expression, attempted to regain control of the situation. Well, Mrs. Harrington, talent comes in many forms. At Maxwell Industries, we value versatility. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps we should move on to the dinner portion of the evening? The chef has prepared an exceptional meal, but the crowd was not so easily redirected. One more piece, someone called out, and others quickly echoed the sentiment. Trapped by social convention and the enthusiasm of his guests, Robert had little choice but to yield. Well, Miss Wong, it seems you have an audience. Perhaps one final selection before dinner. Lily looked directly at him, and for a moment he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not resentment or triumph, but a flash of genuine passion that had nothing to do with him or the awkward situation he'd created. It was the look of someone reconnecting with something deeply loved and long lost. If you insist, Mr. Maxwell, she said softly, returning to the bench. This time, she chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece that began with thunderous, dramatic chords before developing into a complex interplay of melody and harmony that showcased both technical skill and emotional depth. The difficulty level was a step beyond even what she'd played before, requiring enormous strength and control. As she played, the room fell into an even deeper silence than before. The piece told a story, beginning with those powerful opening statements, moving through passages of almost unbearable tension, then resolving into moments of surprising tenderness before building again to a triumphant conclusion. Thomas Chen made his way to Robert's side, speaking just loudly enough for his business partner to hear over the music. She was a rising star, you know. I did some checking after she joined the company. Won international competitions, had concert bookings lined up across Europe and Asia. Critics called her one of the most promising pianists of her generation. Robert's eyebrows rose. Then what the hell is she doing working as my assistant? Thomas shook his head. Family tragedy. Her father got sick, cancer, I think. No insurance. She canceled her tour to care for him and pay the medical bills. By the time he passed away, her career momentum was gone, along with most of their savings. She needed stable employment. Robert watched Lily as this information sank in. Her eyes were closed as she played, her face transformed by the music. This was clearly not just something she did well. It was who she was at her core. You could have told me this before, Robert muttered. Would it have mattered? Thomas asked pointedly. Would you have treated her any differently? Or would you still have seen her as someone to be put in her place? Robert didn't answer, but his expression suggested the barb had found its mark. As the final resonant chords of the Rachmaninoff piece filled the room, something unexpected happened. Lily added an improvisational coda, a brief musical passage that wasn't part of the original composition. The addition was subtle but profound, a moment of pure creativity that transformed the formal classical piece into something deeply personal. When she finished, there was a beat of stunned silence before the room erupted in applause even more enthusiastic than before. Several guests rose to their feet, and Mrs. Harrington actually dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Lily rose from the bench, giving a small, almost reluctant bow. For the first time that evening, she seemed truly at ease, as if the music had reconnected her to a part of herself that had been dormant during her months of filing papers and scheduling meetings. That was, Robert began, then found himself at a loss for words. In his world of real estate deals and power dynamics, genuine artistic expression was something he rarely encountered. He wasn't quite sure how to respond to it. Mrs. Harrington had no such difficulty. She marched up to Lily and took her hands. My dear, you must not let this talent go to waste. My husband and I support the Symphony Foundation. We must talk about getting you back on stage where you belong. Lily's eyes widened slightly. That's very kind, but my circumstances are complicated. Nonsense, Mrs. Harrington interrupted. Talent like yours finds a way. Or rather, we find a way for it. She turned to Robert. Don't you agree, Robert? Put on the spot, Robert nodded. Of course. Miss Wong's abilities are impressive. The words were an understatement and everyone knew it. but it was more genuine praise than most employees ever received from him. As dinner was announced and guests began moving toward the dining room, Lily found herself surrounded by people eager to speak with her. The transformation was remarkable, from the invisible assistant to the star of the evening in the span of 15 minutes. Robert stood back, watching as Thomas approached Lily and engaged her in conversation. His business partner seemed genuinely interested in her story, asking questions about her training and background with none of the calculating assessment that characterized Robert's own interactions with employees. A server approached with a tray of fresh drinks. Robert took a scotch and drained half of it in one swallow. "Sir?" A voice beside him made him turn. It was Nancy, his household manager. "Dinner is ready to be served, but most of the guests are still in here talking to your employee. Should we hold the first course?" "Yes," Robert said absently, his eyes still on Lily. "Give them a few more minutes." "Very good, sir." Nancy hesitated, then added, "She plays beautifully. Reminds me of your mother." The comment caught Robert off guard. His mother had been an accomplished pianist who had supported the family by teaching music when his father's business failed. She had died when Robert was in college before he made his fortune. The grand piano in the music room had been purchased partly in her memory, though he rarely acknowledged this sentimental motivation, even to himself. "My mother was talented," he said stiffly, "but she was no Juilliard graduate." "No," Nancy agreed. "But she played with the same kind of feeling, like the music mattered more than who was listening." With that observation, she discreetly withdrew to inform the kitchen staff of the delay. Robert was left alone with his thoughts, which were uncharacteristically conflicted. The evening had not gone according to plan. His attempt to establish dominance over a quiet employee had backfired spectacularly, exposing him as petty and revealing her as extraordinary. Yet strangely, he didn't feel the anger or resentment such a reversal would normally provoke in him. Instead, he felt something almost like regret, not just for tonight's miscalculation, but for his approach to leadership in general. For the first time in years, Robert Maxwell wondered if there might be better ways to wield power than through humiliation and fear. As the guests finally began moving toward the dining room, Lily glanced back at the piano with what looked like longing. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Robert expected to see triumph or accusation in her gaze, but instead, he saw only the lingering echo of the music that had connected her to her true self. And in that moment, something shifted in Robert Maxwell's carefully constructed world. The dinner portion of Robert Maxwell's gala proceeded with all the elegance his wealth could provide. Crystal glasses sparkled under chandeliers, silverware clinked against fine china, and waitstaff moved silently between tables, pouring wine and serving courses with practiced precision. Yet something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere of the event. Lily Wong, who should have been seated at one of the less prominent tables with other administrative staff, had instead been practically kidnapped by Mrs. Harrington and placed at her table near the front of the room. Throughout the meal, she found herself engaged in conversation with some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city, arts patrons, business leaders, and old money families who normally wouldn't have given someone of her position a second glance. From his place at the head table, Robert watched this development with mixed emotions. He had spent decades carefully crafting these events to reinforce the social hierarchies that benefited him. Tables strategically arranged to signal importance, seating charts designed to reward loyalty and remind everyone of their place in his world. Now a quiet woman from his typing pool had disrupted that careful order, simply by revealing who she truly was. "You're staring," Thomas remarked, taking the seat beside him. The first course had been cleared and guests were mingling briefly before the main course arrived. "I'm observing," Robert corrected, sipping his wine. "There's a difference." Thomas nodded toward Mrs. Harrington's table. "She's been introducing Lily to everyone who matters in the local arts scene. Anton Petrovich from the symphony orchestra is practically begging her to audition." Robert's eyes narrowed. "She works for me, you know. She can't just run off to play concerts." Thomas gave his business partner a measuring look. "Is that what's bothering you? That your administrative assistant might have better options than filing your paperwork?" Robert didn't answer immediately. The truth was more complicated than he cared to admit. It wasn't just about losing an efficient employee, it was about being shown as the lesser person in a public confrontation he himself had initiated. She signed a contract, he said finally, which I'm sure includes provisions for appropriate notice if she chooses to resign, Thomas pointed out. Besides, I thought you'd be pleased. Isn't this what your galas are supposedly about? Networking and opportunities. For people I choose to elevate, yes, Thomas shook his head. You know, Robert, for a self-made man, you can be remarkably blind to the struggles of others trying to make their own way. The comment struck a nerve. I worked for everything I have, Robert said sharply. No one's disputing that, Thomas replied. But would you have gotten where you are if someone had deliberately tried to humiliate you at a crucial moment? The question hung in the air between them. Robert might have responded angrily, but at that moment, Mrs. Harrington approached their table, her face flushed with excitement and wine. Robert, you've been hiding a treasure in your company, she declared, loud enough that nearby conversations paused. Do you have any idea who Lily Wong actually is? Robert forced a smile. My administrative assistant, as I recall. Mrs. Harrington waved her hand dismissively. Before that, dear boy, she was Chen Lihua's protégé. The name meant nothing to Robert, but several nearby guests gasped or murmured in recognition. Chen Lihua, Mrs. Harrington explained, noting Robert's blank look, is only one of the most celebrated piano instructors of the last 30 years. Her students perform with major orchestras worldwide. Getting accepted to study with her is nearly impossible. How interesting, Robert said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Mrs. Harrington leaned closer, lowering her voice slightly. Robert, to be frank, I'm shocked you have someone of her caliber handling your schedule and fetching your coffee. It would be like hiring Yo-Yo Ma to tune your cello. Perhaps, Thomas interjected smoothly, seeing Robert's jaw tighten. This is an opportunity for everyone. Lily clearly has extraordinary talent that shouldn't go to waste, but I'm sure arrangements could be made that benefit all parties. Mrs. Harrington straightened up. Well said, Thomas. Always the diplomat. In fact, I've already spoken to Anton about a special showcase concert next month. The symphony's regular pianist is on maternity leave, and they need a soloist for the Tchaikovsky piano concerto. She beamed triumphantly. Lily would be perfect. Has Miss Wong agreed to this plan? Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. Not yet, Mrs. Harrington admitted. She's been very proper about needing to discuss any schedule changes with her employer first. She fixed Robert with a pointed stare. Which is why I'm telling you, Robert. This is a chance for you to do the right thing. Before Robert could respond, a commotion near the entrance to the dining room drew everyone's attention. 2 security guards were speaking with a man who appeared disheveled and agitated. Though they were trying to keep their voices down, the confrontation was becoming increasingly visible to the guests. What's going on? Robert demanded, rising from his seat. Nancy, the household manager, hurried over. I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell. There's a young man insisting he needs to speak with one of your guests. He doesn't have an invitation, but he's quite persistent. Have him removed, Robert said curtly. But at that moment, Lily stood up from her table, her face pale. Wait, she called out. That's my brother. All eyes turned to her as she hurried across the dining room. The young man, upon seeing her, broke away from the security guards and met her halfway. Mike, what are you doing here? Lily asked, her voice pitched low but still audible in the suddenly quiet room. It's Grandma, he replied, his worry evident even from a distance. She fell. They've taken her to Memorial Hospital. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. Is she? She's stable, but asking for you. Mike ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I'm sorry to crash this fancy party, but your phone was going straight to voicemail. Of course. Let me just get my purse, Lily said, already turning toward where she'd been seated. Robert, watching the scene unfold, felt an unexpected twinge of empathy. Family emergencies were something everyone could understand, regardless of their position in life. Without fully thinking it through, he stepped forward. Miss Wong, he called out, causing her to pause. Take my car. It's faster than waiting for a taxi. Surprise flashed across Lily's face. Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, but that's not necessary. I insist, he said, nodding to Nancy. Have David bring the Bentley around front immediately. To Lily, he added, I hope your grandmother recovers quickly. The gesture created a ripple of approving murmurs among the guests. Robert wasn't sure if he'd made the offer out of genuine concern or a desire to regain some social capital after the piano incident. but the gratitude in Lily's eyes seemed sincere. "Thank you," she said simply before hurrying away with her brother. As the dinner resumed and conversation gradually returned to normal, Mrs. Harrington gave Robert an appraising look. "Well, that was surprisingly decent of you, Robert." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her assessment. "It's just a car." She took a sip of her wine. "You know, I've always thought there was more to you than the ruthless businessman you pretend to be. Your mother wouldn't have raised a son without any compassion at all." The mention of his mother for the second time that evening unsettled Robert. "You barely knew my mother, Eleanor." "I knew her well enough," Mrs. Harrington replied. "We served on the Community Arts Council together for years before her illness. She was talented and kind, much like your young pianist." Before Robert could respond, Thomas interrupted, smoothly changing the subject to a recent city development project that he knew would engage both Robert and Mrs. Harrington. The conversation moved on, but Robert found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to Lily Wong and the unexpected events of the evening. Later, as the last guests were departing and the staff began the enormous task of cleaning up, Robert retreated to his study with a glass of scotch. The quiet room, lined with books he rarely read and awards he rarely looked at, had always been his sanctuary. Tonight, however, he found no peace there. He set his drink down and walked back to the music room. The Steinway stood silent now, its lid closed. Robert ran his hand over its polished surface, remembering how it had come alive under Lily's fingers. For years, the piano had been just another status symbol in a house full of them. Tonight, it had been transformed back into what it was meant to be, an instrument of extraordinary expression. On impulse, Robert lifted the lid and sat on the bench. He placed his fingers on the keys, attempting to recall the simple pieces his mother had tried to teach him, before he declared the lessons boring and quit. All he could manage was a halting, childish rendition of Heart and Soul, the kind of thing people who can't really play piano attempt at parties. The contrast between his clumsy efforts and Lily's artistry couldn't have been more stark. And in that contrast, Robert Maxwell began to see something about himself that he had spent decades avoiding. His phone buzzed with a text from his driver. David. Dropped Miss Wong and her brother at Memorial Hospital. Offered to wait, but she insisted it wasn't necessary. Returning to the house now. Robert stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. Find out which room her grandmother is in. Send flowers tomorrow morning with my best wishes for her recovery. It was a small gesture, possibly meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but as Robert closed the piano lid and turned out the lights in the music room, he found himself wondering what other changes might follow from this unexpected evening. The Monday following the gala, Maxwell Industries headquarters hummed with gossip. Word had spread quickly about the quiet administrative assistant who had stunned everyone with her piano playing, and about the boss who had been put in his place. The story grew with each retelling. In some versions, Lily had made Robert apologize publicly. In others, she had already quit to join a world tour. The truth was more mundane. Lily Wong arrived at her desk precisely at 8:30 a.m. as she did every morning. She wore her usual modest business attire, her hair pulled back in its customary neat bun. If not for the sidelong glances and whispers that followed her through the office, it might have seemed like any other day. But something had changed. Lily moved with a subtle new confidence, making eye contact with colleagues who had previously looked through her. When people stopped by her desk to congratulate her on her performance, she thanked them with genuine warmth rather than the careful reserve that had been her armor. Robert Maxwell, contrary to expectations, did not arrive at the office until nearly noon. When he finally stepped off the elevator, his expression was unreadable, his posture stiff. Employees who had been eagerly awaiting the next chapter in the weekend's drama were disappointed when he walked straight to his office, without acknowledging anyone, closing the door firmly behind him. An hour later, Lily's desk phone rang. "Miss Wong," came Robert's voice, unusually formal even for him. "Please come to my office." The floor fell silent as she stood and walked to the corner office. Speculation ran wild. Was she about to be fired for embarrassing the boss? Promoted, given special privileges? A few people drifted casually toward that end of the floor, hoping to overhear whatever was about to happen. Inside the office, Robert sat behind his massive desk, a barrier between himself and the world. He gestured toward one of the chairs opposite him. "Please, sit down." Lily took the offered seat, her posture perfect, her expression composed. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. "How is your grandmother?" Robert asked, surprising her with the question. "She's stable, thank you. It was a minor fall, but at her age, they're being cautious." Robert nodded. "Good, I sent flowers. I hope that wasn't overstepping." "No, it was very kind. She appreciated them." An awkward silence fell between them. Robert drummed his fingers on the desk once, then stopped himself as if realizing it betrayed his discomfort. "Miss Wong, I owe you an apology," he said finally, the words coming out stiffly. "My behavior on Saturday night was inappropriate and unprofessional." Lily's surprise showed only in a slight widening of her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, I appreciate that." "I've spoken with Thomas this morning," Robert continued. "He's informed me that Mrs. Harrington has been quite persistent in her efforts to recruit you for musical opportunities." Lily tensed slightly. "Mr. Maxwell, I want to assure you that I have no intention of neglecting my responsibilities here. If Mrs. Harrington contacted you, I had no part in—" Robert held up a hand to stop her. "Actually, Miss Wong, I've been giving this some thought. Your talent is exceptional. It seems a waste to have you managing my calendar when you could be performing." "Sir, I'm offering you a choice," Robert said, leaning forward slightly. "Option 1. You continue as my administrative assistant with a modest raise and my assurance that there will be no further incidents like Saturday night." He paused, studying her reaction. Lily remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Option 2, Robert went on, is a bit more complicated. Maxwell Industries would sponsor you for a series of performances with the symphony, beginning with the showcase Mrs. Harrington mentioned. Your position here would shift to part-time, with flexible hours that accommodate rehearsals and performances. Your salary would remain the same despite the reduced hours." Lily's carefully maintained composure faltered. "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" It was a good question. One Robert had asked himself repeatedly over the past 36 hours. The answer had come to him in the early hours of the morning as he lay awake, remembering his mother at her small upright piano, playing for the pure joy of it even as bills piled up on the kitchen table. "Let's just say I'm making a long overdue investment in the arts," he replied, unwilling to share his personal epiphany. Then more honestly, he added, "and perhaps attempting to correct a misjudgment on my part." Lily was silent for a long moment, processing the unexpected offer. "May I ask what prompted this? Beyond Saturday night, I mean." Robert sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Miss Wong, I built this company from nothing. I grew up with very little, and I promised myself I would never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, I started to believe that power meant making others feel small." He gestured toward the window where the city sprawled below. "I have everything I thought I wanted. Buildings with my name on them. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. People who jump when I say jump. And yet," he trailed off, seeming almost surprised by his own candor. "And yet," Lily prompted softly, "and yet on Saturday night when you played that piano, you had something I haven't felt in years. Purpose, passion. The ability to move people not because they fear you, but because you've created something meaningful." The admission hung in the air between them, surprisingly vulnerable from a man known for his ruthless business tactics. "I don't know what to say," Lily said finally. "You don't need to decide immediately," Robert assured her. "Take some time to think about it. But if you do choose option 2, I've already spoken with legal about drawing up the necessary paperwork for the sponsorship." Lily nodded slowly. "This is unexpected. For both of us," Robert agreed with a small wry smile. "Now, unless you have any other questions, I believe we both have work to return to." The meeting concluded, Lily returned to her desk, her mind spinning with possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just days ago. Throughout the afternoon, she caught herself daydreaming about pieces she would choose if she were to perform again, about the feel of a concert hall, about the rush of connection with an audience that she had almost forgotten. Robert, meanwhile, found himself unusually reflective. He canceled 2 meetings claiming urgent business elsewhere, and instead spent the afternoon reviewing a proposal that had been gathering dust in his files for months, a community arts program that Thomas had championed but that Robert had dismissed as a waste of resources. 5 months later, the Maxwell Industries Community Music Center opened its doors in a renovated warehouse in one of the city's underserved neighborhoods. The facility included practice rooms, classrooms, a small performance space, and a recording studio. Lessons and instruments were provided free of charge to children whose families couldn't otherwise afford them. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Robert gave a brief, uncharacteristically humble speech about the importance of making arts education accessible to all. Standing nearby, Thomas watched his business partner with bemused approval, still slightly disbelieving of the transformation he'd witnessed over the past months. "Never thought I'd see the day," Thomas murmured to Lily, who stood beside him in an elegant blue dress, having just performed a short recital to inaugurate the center's Steinway, a smaller version of the one in Robert's music room, but with the same rich, resonant tone. "People can surprise you," Lily replied, watching as Robert awkwardly accepted thanks from community members. "Some just need the right motivation to change." Her part-time role at Maxwell Industries had evolved into a position as director of the new music center, while her performing career had been cautiously rekindled with a series of well-received local concerts. Next month, she would perform with the symphony as a featured soloist, her first major performance since setting aside her musical career years ago. As the ceremony concluded and people mingled, enjoying refreshments and touring the new facility, Robert found himself standing alone near the piano. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, not playing, just feeling the smooth ivory beneath his fingertips. "You could take lessons, you know," Lily said, approaching quietly. "It's never too late to learn." Robert shook his head, smiling slightly. "Some talents are meant to be appreciated, not imitated. Besides, I found I'm better suited to enabling others than performing myself." Lily nodded, understanding the layers in his statement. "Your mother would be proud of this place." Robert looked surprised. "Thomas told you about her?" "No," Lily said. "Mrs. Harrington did. She said your mother believed everyone deserved access to music, regardless of their circumstances." Robert was quiet for a moment, memories surfacing of weekend afternoons when neighborhood children would crowd into their small living room for informal lessons his mother provided for, whatever the families could afford, sometimes just a loaf of homemade bread or help with household repairs. "She would have been better at this than I am," he admitted. "Maybe," Lily agreed, "but you're the one who made it happen." As the afternoon light streamed through the windows of the new music center, falling across the eager faces of children already signed up for the program's first semester, Robert Maxwell recognized something he hadn't expected to find through this venture. Not the familiar satisfaction of adding another achievement to his resume, but something quieter and more profound. The sense that perhaps his mother's legacy would continue after all, in a way that all his financial success had never managed to accomplish, and it had begun with an attempt to humiliate someone whose true worth he had failed to recognize. An irony that was not lost on him as he watched Lily answer questions from an excited young girl who wanted to know if her hands were big enough to play the piano. "Start with what you can reach," he heard Lily tell the child. "You'll be surprised how far that takes you." Good advice, Robert thought, for more than just piano playing.